The rain had been falling over the city for hours, turning the busy streets into rivers of silver under the glow of streetlights. People hurried through the sidewalks with umbrellas above their heads, rushing toward warm homes, expensive restaurants, and comfortable lives. Nobody wanted to stop. Nobody wanted to look at the people sitting quietly on the streets, especially the ones who had become invisible to the world. Among those forgotten faces was a man sitting beside an old brick wall near the entrance of a luxury shopping district. His clothes were worn, his shoes were damaged, and his hair was messy from the heavy rain. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another homeless man struggling to survive. His name was Daniel Carter, though almost nobody knew that anymore. Daniel sat silently watching the expensive cars pass by. The strange thing was that his eyes did not carry anger. They carried sadness. He was not begging aggressively or calling people for attention. He simply held a small cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps. Thank you." Most people ignored him. Some looked away. Some walked faster. A few dropped coins without even stopping. Daniel thanked every person, even those who gave him almost nothing. He had learned a long time ago that kindness was not measured by the amount someone gave, but by whether they chose to see another human being. Across the street, a black luxury car stopped in front of a high-end fashion store. A woman stepped out wearing an elegant emerald green dress. She looked like someone who belonged in magazines. Her confidence, beauty, and graceful movements made people turn their heads. Her name was Isabella Monroe. Isabella was known throughout the city as a successful businesswoman who had built her own fashion company from nothing. She had money, status, and everything many people dreamed of having. But behind her perfect appearance was a woman who understood loneliness and struggle. Years earlier, Isabella had lost her parents in an accident. After that, she had spent years building her company while secretly carrying the pain of having no family left. She knew what it felt like to be surrounded by people but still feel alone. That evening, as Isabella walked toward her car, she noticed Daniel sitting in the rain. She stopped. Her assistant, who was walking behind her, looked surprised. "Miss Monroe, we should go. The weather is getting worse," the assistant said, but Isabella continued looking at the man. Something about him caught her attention. It was not his appearance. It was the way he sat there calmly while the entire world ignored him. She walked closer. "Are you okay?" Isabella asked. Daniel looked up. For a moment, he seemed shocked that someone had actually spoken to him. "Yes, ma'am," he replied softly. "I'm fine." Isabella glanced at the rain pouring around him. "You're sitting in the middle of a storm. That doesn't look fine." Daniel gave a small smile. "I've survived worse storms than this." The answer stayed in Isabella's mind. Most people would have asked him why he was homeless. They would have judged him. They would have assumed he was lazy or irresponsible. But Isabella noticed something different. The man spoke like someone educated, like someone who had once lived a completely different life. She opened her purse and took out some money. Daniel immediately shook his head. "No, thank you." Isabella looked surprised. "You don't want it?" "I appreciate the kindness," Daniel said, "but money won't fix everything." The response confused her. A homeless man refusing money was not something she expected. "Then what do you need?" Isabella asked. Daniel looked away toward the busy street. "Maybe just someone to remember that I exist." Those words touched something deep inside Isabella. For years, she had known many wealthy people who had everything but lacked compassion. Yet this man, who seemed to have nothing, still spoke with dignity. She looked at the rain falling harder. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Daniel became quiet. That silence was his answer. Isabella looked toward her car, then back at him. "Come with me." Daniel immediately shook his head. "No, I can't." "Why?" "Because people like you don't usually invite people like me into their homes." Isabella studied his face. "Maybe people like me should start doing things differently." Daniel looked at her carefully, trying to understand whether she was serious. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Isabella said. "I don't." She paused. "But I know what it feels like when the world stops seeing someone." The words affected him. After a long silence, Daniel slowly stood up. The luxury car driver looked shocked when he saw the man approaching. "Miss Monroe." "I know," Isabella interrupted. "He's coming with us." The driver hesitated but opened the door. As Daniel entered the car, he looked around nervously. The leather seats, the quiet interior, and the expensive details reminded him of a life he had lost, a life nobody knew about, a life he had hidden from the world. Because Daniel Carter was not really a homeless man. 6 months earlier, he had been one of the most powerful businessmen on the planet. He was the founder and owner of Carter Global Holdings, a company valued at hundreds of billions of dollars. His name appeared on business magazines around the world. Billionaires wanted meetings with him. Presidents invited him to private events. But everything changed after a betrayal from someone he trusted most. His own business partner had secretly attempted to take control of the company. During the battle, Daniel disappeared from public life. He wanted to discover who truly cared about him without his money and influence. So he walked away. He left behind his mansion, his cars, his employees, and his identity. He lived among ordinary people, dressed as a poor man, searching for something money could never buy, human kindness. And now, sitting inside Isabella's car, he had found something unexpected. A woman who helped him without knowing his name, without knowing his wealth, without expecting anything in return. When they arrived at Isabella's home, Daniel stepped outside and looked at the beautiful mansion in front of him. "I should warn you," he said quietly. "About what?" Isabella asked. "Helping strangers can sometimes change your life forever." Isabella smiled slightly. "Maybe my life needs changing." Neither of them knew that this simple act of kindness would soon reveal secrets powerful enough to shake the entire city. And neither knew that the homeless man standing beside her was about to change her world forever. The morning sunlight entered Isabella Monroe's mansion through the large glass windows, painting golden patterns across the polished floor. The house was usually filled with silence, the kind of silence that came from having everything but still feeling something was missing. Isabella had lived there for years, surrounded by beautiful furniture, expensive artwork, and every comfort money could provide. Yet she often felt that the huge rooms were too empty. But that morning was different. For the first time in a long while, there was another person sitting at her dining table. Daniel Carter sat quietly, holding a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked uncomfortable in the luxurious surroundings, almost like he was afraid of touching anything. Isabella noticed the way he looked around the room, not with greed or jealousy, but with memories. It was the expression of someone who had once belonged to a world like this. "You don't seem surprised by all this," Isabella said while sitting across from him. Daniel looked up. "Surprised by what?" "The house, the money, the lifestyle." Daniel smiled faintly. "I've seen beautiful things before." The answer was simple, but Isabella noticed something unusual. Most people who entered her home for the first time either became impressed or overwhelmed. They looked at the expensive paintings, the designer furniture, and the luxury around them. Daniel did not. He looked at everything as if he understood its value but did not care about it. "Where did you live before?" Isabella asked. Daniel became quiet. It was only for a second, but Isabella noticed. "I moved around a lot," he finally answered. "That sounds difficult." It was. She studied him carefully. There was pain behind his eyes, but also confidence. It was strange. A homeless man should have been worried about survival. Yet Daniel carried himself like someone who had faced much greater battles. Isabella decided not to push him. Instead, she offered him breakfast. At first, Daniel refused. "I don't want to become a burden." "You're not a burden," Isabella replied. "You don't even know me." "No," she said. "But I know enough." Daniel looked at her. "What do you know?" "I know you were sitting in the rain while everyone ignored you. I know you refused money when you needed help. I know you speak with respect even when life has not treated you fairly." For the first time in months, Daniel felt something he had almost forgotten. Someone seeing him. Not his wealth. Not his company. Not his reputation. Just him. After breakfast, Isabella gave Daniel some clean clothes and allowed him to rest in one of the guest rooms. She expected him to sleep for hours because of everything he had experienced. But Daniel spent most of the morning reading books from her library. When Isabella passed by and saw him, she stopped. "You read business books?" Daniel looked at the book in his hand and smiled. "Sometimes." The book was about international markets and corporate leadership. Isabella walked closer. "That's a difficult book." "It's not that difficult." She laughed softly. "Most people don't say that." Daniel closed the book. "Knowledge belongs to everyone. It doesn't matter where someone sleeps. Those words stayed with Isabella. Over the next few days, Daniel slowly became part of the household. He helped the staff, fixed small things around the house, and treated everyone with kindness. The workers respected him because he never acted superior. One evening, Isabella's longtime housekeeper, Maria, approached her. "Miss Monroe, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "That man, there is something different about him." Isabella smiled. "I noticed too. He doesn't act like someone who has lost everything." "I know." Maria lowered her voice. "Who is he?" Isabella looked toward the garden where Daniel was standing alone, watching the sunset. "I don't know." And that was the truth. She knew nothing about his past. She did not know his real story. She did not know that the quiet man drinking coffee in her home had once been on the cover of every major business magazine. She did not know that powerful people around the world were searching for him. She did not know that his disappearance had caused chaos in the corporate world. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, inside the headquarters of Carter Global Holdings, executives were gathered in a tense meeting. The company's temporary leader, Victor Hayes, stood in front of a large screen displaying financial reports. "We need to accept reality," Victor said. "Daniel Carter is gone." The room remained silent. "He has abandoned the company." One executive shook his head. "That doesn't make sense. Daniel would never walk away." Victor smiled slightly. "People change when they lose power." But what nobody in the room knew was that Daniel had not lost power. He had chosen to leave it behind. Victor had spent months trying to convince the world that Daniel was finished. He wanted control of the company permanently. But there was one problem. Daniel Carter was still alive, and he had not forgotten anything. Back at Isabella's home, Daniel stood in the garden holding an old phone hidden inside his bag. The device had remained turned off since the day he disappeared. He stared at it for a long time. Then he turned it on. Within seconds, hundreds of messages appeared. Missed calls, emergency notifications, news updates. But one message caught his attention. "Mr. Carter, we found evidence that Victor betrayed you. Please contact us immediately." Daniel's expression changed. The calm, homeless man disappeared for a moment. The powerful businessman returned. His eyes became focused. His past had finally caught up with him. But before he could respond, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Isabella. "Daniel?" He quickly turned off the phone. "Yes?" She looked at him. "For someone who claims to have nothing, you look like someone carrying a very heavy secret." Daniel remained silent. Because she was right. He was carrying a secret that could change both of their lives forever. And soon Isabella would discover that the man she had brought home from the street was not a helpless stranger. He was the missing billionaire the entire world had been searching for. The days passed quietly inside Isabella Monroe's home. But something about Daniel. Carter's presence continued to change the atmosphere around the mansion. Before he arrived, the house was beautiful but cold. Every room looked perfect, every object had a place, and everything appeared exactly as it should. Yet there was no laughter, no warmth, and no real connection. Daniel brought something money could never buy. He brought honesty, humility, and a sense of peace that Isabella had not felt in years. Isabella began noticing small things about him. Daniel always thanked the workers who cleaned the house. He never allowed anyone to treat him differently because of his situation. When the gardeners struggled to lift heavy equipment, Daniel immediately helped without hesitation. When a delivery worker accidentally dropped a package, Daniel helped pick everything up instead of getting angry. One afternoon, Isabella watched him from the balcony as he helped an elderly employee repair a broken chair. She smiled quietly. "You know," she said when she approached him, "most people who have lost everything become bitter." Daniel looked at the chair in his hands. "Sometimes losing things shows you what was truly important." Isabella looked at him carefully. "That sounds like something someone learns after a very painful experience." Daniel paused. It was. There was a sadness in his voice that made Isabella want to ask more. But she respected his silence. Over time, their conversations became deeper. They talked about dreams, regrets, childhood memories, and the mistakes people make while chasing success. Isabella discovered that Daniel was incredibly intelligent. He understood business, technology, investments, and world affairs better than most experts she had met. One evening, while they were sitting in the garden, Isabella finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Daniel, who were you before all this?" The question created a long silence. The wind moved gently through the trees. The city lights shined in the distance. Daniel looked down at his hands. "I was someone who thought money could protect me from everything. And now? Now I know money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy loyalty. It cannot buy love. It cannot tell you who is standing beside you because they care, and who is standing beside you because they want something." Isabella understood those words more than he knew. Her own life had been filled with people who admired her success but disappeared whenever she needed emotional support. "I think everyone deserves a chance to start again," Isabella said. Daniel looked at her. "That's why you helped me?" She smiled. "I helped you because you were a person who needed help, not because I expected anything." Those words affected Daniel more than she realized. For months, he had been surrounded by people trying to find him because they wanted his power, his money, or his company. But Isabella had found him when he had nothing visible to offer. She had given kindness to a stranger, and that meant more than any business deal he had ever made. Meanwhile, outside Isabella's world, rumors about Daniel Carter were spreading again. News channels began reporting mysterious updates about the missing billionaire. 6 months after disappearing, new evidence suggests Daniel Carter may still be alive. The report played across television screens around the world. Victor Hayes watched the news from his expensive office, his face becoming tense. "He can't come back," Victor whispered. His assistant stood nearby. "What will you do if he returns?" Victor looked out over the city. "Make sure he never gets the chance." Victor had spent months building his own control over Carter Global Holdings. He had manipulated information, convinced investors that Daniel had abandoned the company, and quietly moved people loyal to Daniel out of important positions. But there was one thing he had not expected. Daniel was not broken. He was watching, and he was preparing. One night, Daniel finally decided it was time to contact someone from his old life. He waited until Isabella had gone to sleep, then walked into the quiet study and turned on the hidden phone again. He called a number he knew by heart. After 3 rings, someone answered. "Hello?" Daniel closed his eyes. "It's me." There was complete silence on the other end. Then a shocked voice replied, "Mr. Carter?" "Yes. We thought you were dead. I needed everyone to believe I was gone." The person on the phone became emotional. "Do you know what happened while you disappeared?" "I know enough." "No, you don't. Victor has been destroying everything you built." Daniel's expression became serious. "Send me everything." "We will." The call ended, but Daniel did not notice that someone was standing near the doorway. Isabella. She had woken up because she heard voices. She looked at him with confusion. "Daniel?" He turned around slowly. For the first time, Isabella saw a completely different side of him. Not the quiet homeless man. Not the gentle stranger. A powerful man who carried authority. A man who was used to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She looked at the phone in his hand. "Who were you talking to?" Daniel remained silent. The truth he had been hiding was finally standing between them. "I think it's time I told you everything." Isabella said nothing. She waited. Daniel took a deep breath. "My real name is Daniel Carter." She looked confused. "That is your name." "Yes, but you don't know what it means." He walked toward the desk and opened a laptop. On the screen appeared a news article. The headline read, "Daniel Carter, founder of Carter Global Holdings, missing for 6 months." Isabella stared at the screen. Her heart began beating faster. She looked at Daniel, then back at the article. The face in the photograph was the same man standing in front of her. The same eyes, the same expression, but everything else was different. The man in the photograph wore expensive suits and stood beside world leaders. The man in her home had arrived wearing torn clothes. "Daniel," her voice was barely a whisper. "You're—" He nodded. "Yes. I'm the person everyone has been searching for." Isabella stepped back, trying to understand everything. The homeless man she rescued was not homeless. The stranger she invited into her home was not powerless. He was one of the richest and most influential men in the world. But before Isabella could say anything else, Daniel received another message. The message contained only a few words. "Victor knows you are alive." Daniel looked at the screen. The danger had arrived. and now Isabella was involved. The room remained silent after Daniel revealed his identity. Isabella stood near the desk staring at the screen in disbelief. The man she had brought home from the rain, the man she had given food and shelter to, was the same person whose name appeared in newspapers across the world. Daniel Carter was not just a successful businessman. He was a symbol of power, intelligence, and influence. His company had changed industries, created thousands of jobs, and made him one of the wealthiest people alive. Yet the person standing in front of her was the same man who had sat on a cold sidewalk with worn clothes and a small cardboard sign. Isabella looked at him with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "Because I wanted to know if someone could see me without knowing my name." The answer was honest, but Isabella still felt hurt. "You allowed me to believe you had nothing." "I did have nothing," Daniel replied softly. "Not everything that matters can be measured by money." Isabella turned away and looked through the window. The city lights outside were shining brightly, but inside the room everything felt different. She remembered the first day she saw him. She remembered the rain, the loneliness in his eyes, and the way he refused her money. She remembered how he never acted like someone pretending to be poor. He acted like someone who had learned what life truly meant. "Were you testing me?" she asked. Daniel quickly shook his head. "No, I was never testing you." "Then what was I?" "You were kindness when I had no reason to expect kindness." Those words softened her anger. Daniel walked closer but kept his distance. "I understand why you're upset. Maybe I should have told you sooner. But after losing everything I thought I could trust, I didn't know who was real anymore." Isabella looked at him. "What happened to you?" Daniel remained quiet for a moment. Then he began telling the story he had hidden from the entire world. 6 months earlier, Daniel had been at the peak of his success. Carter Global Holdings had expanded across continents. His decisions affected markets, companies, and thousands of employees. People admired him, but very few people truly knew him. Among those few was Victor Hayes. Victor had been Daniel's closest friend since the beginning of his career. They had built businesses together, shared dreams, and overcome difficult times. Daniel trusted him completely. That trust became his biggest mistake. Victor secretly created a plan to take control of the company. He manipulated financial reports, convinced board members that Daniel was becoming unstable, and slowly turned people against him. When Daniel discovered the betrayal, he realized something painful. Many people around him were not loyal to him. They were loyal to his success. Instead of fighting immediately, Daniel disappeared. He wanted to understand who would look for him because they cared, and who would only search because they wanted his wealth. "I thought disappearing would show me the truth," Daniel said. "And did it?" Daniel looked at Isabella. "Yes." The answer surprised her. "Most people forgot me. Some people celebrated my disappearance. But one person saw a stranger in the rain and decided he mattered." Isabella looked down. She did not know what to say. Before she could respond, Daniel's phone rang. He answered immediately. A serious voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Carter, we have a problem." Daniel's expression changed. "What happened?" "Victor's people found one of your old security records. They know you were in the city recently." Daniel looked toward the window. "How much do they know?" "Not enough yet. But they are searching." The call ended. Isabella noticed the concern on Daniel's face. "Are you in danger?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes." The honesty frightened her. "Then why are you still here?" Daniel looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "You could leave. You could go anywhere. You have money, power, protection." Daniel smiled sadly. "I spent 6 months running away from my old life. I'm not running anymore." The next morning, Isabella woke up to find Daniel already working. The quiet man who had once sat on the street was gone. Now she saw the businessman hidden beneath the disguise. He sat in the study reviewing documents, analyzing information, and making calls with confidence. He spoke calmly, but everyone on the other side of the phone listened carefully. For the first time, Isabella understood the difference between pretending to be powerful and actually being powerful. Daniel did not need to prove anything. Power was simply part of who he was. Later that afternoon, Isabella entered the study. "I need to ask you something." Daniel looked up. "Anything. If you return to your company." "What happens to me?" Daniel looked confused. What do you mean? I became part of your story. If everyone finds out I helped you, people will ask questions. Daniel stood up. Isabella, you helped me when nobody knew who I was. That is something I will never forget. She looked at him. But your world is different from mine. Daniel smiled. Maybe that's the problem. I spent years surrounded by people from my world and none of them did what you did. Those words stayed with her. But neither of them knew that someone outside the mansion was watching. A black car was parked across the street. Inside sat a man holding a photograph of Daniel. The man made a phone call. I found him. A voice answered. Are you sure? Yes, Daniel Carter is alive. There was a pause. Then the voice replied coldly. Then we finish what we started. The car slowly drove away. Inside the mansion, Daniel looked at the city outside and knew the peaceful days were over. The truth was finally coming into the light. But with the truth came enemies. And this time, Daniel was not fighting only for his company. He was fighting to protect the one person who helped him when he had nothing. The woman who saw a homeless stranger. The woman who gave him a home. The woman who unknowingly became the most important person in his new life. The city that once celebrated Daniel Carter's success was now filled with rumors, questions, and uncertainty. News reporters were searching everywhere for answers. Investors were demanding explanations. Employees of Carter, Global Holdings, were waiting anxiously for the return of the man who had built the company from the ground up. Nobody knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain. Daniel Carter was no longer hiding. Inside Isabella's mansion, Daniel stood in front of a large window, watching the city he had once controlled. For years he had believed success meant having power over everything around him. But after losing his position and living as an ordinary person, he understood something much deeper. A person's true value was not determined by their wealth, their company, or their reputation. It was determined by the people who stood beside them when they had nothing to offer. Isabella entered the room quietly and placed a cup of coffee beside him. You haven't slept, she said. Daniel smiled slightly. Neither have you. She looked away. I'm still trying to understand everything. I know. You were living on the street while being one of the richest people in the world. That sounds impossible. Daniel looked at the city. Sometimes the impossible things are the ones that reveal the truth. Isabella sat down. Do you regret disappearing? Daniel thought for a moment. No. The answer surprised her. Even after everything that happened? Yes, because if I had never disappeared, I would have never known who truly cared about me. There was a quiet moment between them. Isabella had spent her life believing success came from hard work and determination. She still believed that. But Daniel had shown her another truth. A person could have everything and still be empty, and a person could have nothing and still possess incredible strength. Meanwhile, inside Carter Global Holdings headquarters, Victor Hayes was losing control. The moment news spread that Daniel Carter was alive, everything Victor had built began collapsing. Board members who had supported him started questioning their decisions. Investors demanded meetings. Employees began speaking openly about Daniel's return. Victor stood inside his office, staring at the city skyline. He should have stayed gone, he said angrily. His assistant remained silent. Do you understand what happens if Daniel returns? Victor continued. Everything I worked for disappears. The assistant looked nervous. Maybe it's time to negotiate. Victor turned around sharply. Negotiate? Yes, if Mr. Carter returns, fighting him may not be possible. Victor laughed coldly. You don't understand, Daniel. He walked toward his desk. Daniel believes people can change. He believes loyalty and honesty still matter. He picked up a folder containing documents. That is his weakness. At that moment, Victor made a decision. He would destroy Daniel's reputation before Daniel had a chance to reclaim his company. Later that day, Daniel received information about Victor's plan. A former employee, who had remained loyal to Daniel, sent him evidence showing that Victor had secretly manipulated company records. The evidence was enough to expose everything. But Daniel noticed something else. Victor was not acting alone. Someone powerful was helping him. This goes deeper than I thought, Daniel said. Isabella looked at the documents. Who else is involved? I don't know yet. Are you afraid? Daniel looked at her. I used to think fear was something powerful people didn't experience. And now? Now I know courage only exists because fear exists. Isabella smiled softly. That's probably the most human thing you've said. Daniel laughed. For a brief moment, they forgot about enemies, companies, and danger. They were simply two people having a conversation. But that peaceful moment did not last. That evening, Isabella received an unexpected visitor. A man in a dark suit arrived at the mansion and introduced himself as Robert Lane, one of Daniel's former advisors. I need to speak with Mr. Carter immediately, he said. Daniel came downstairs and froze when he saw him. Robert. Robert looked relieved. Thank goodness you're alive. Daniel shook his hand. What happened? Robert looked serious. Victor is preparing something bigger than taking your company. Daniel's expression changed. What do you mean? Robert opened a briefcase and removed several files. He has been collecting information about you. Personal information. Daniel looked through the papers. Photos, records, private documents, everything. He wants to destroy me publicly, Daniel said. Robert nodded. If he cannot defeat you financially, he will attack your reputation. Isabella looked concerned. What can we do? Daniel closed the folder. We tell the truth. Robert looked surprised. Are you sure? Yes. But the world may judge you for disappearing. Daniel smiled. I spent my whole life worrying about what the world thought of me. I'm finished with that. The following morning, Daniel made a decision that shocked everyone. He announced that he would hold a live press conference. For 6 months, people had wondered where Daniel Carter was. Now they would finally hear from him. The day of the press conference arrived. Reporters filled the room. Cameras were everywhere. The world waited. Then Daniel walked onto the stage, not wearing expensive clothing to impress anyone, not trying to look powerful, just being himself. The room became silent. 6 months ago, I disappeared, Daniel began. Millions of people watched. I understand why people questioned me. I understand why some believed I had abandoned my responsibilities. He paused. But the truth is, I needed to understand something important. The cameras focused on him. I needed to know whether people valued me because of my success or because of who I was. The room remained silent. Daniel continued. During that time, I met someone who changed my understanding of humanity. He looked briefly toward Isabella, who was watching from behind the cameras. Someone who helped me without knowing my name, my wealth, or my position. The reporters immediately became interested. Daniel revealed the truth about his disappearance, Victor's betrayal, and the evidence against him. By the end of the conference, the world saw Daniel Carter differently. Not just as a billionaire, but as a man who had lost everything and discovered what truly mattered. However, as Daniel left the stage, one message arrived on his phone. The message contained only one sentence. You won the first battle, but you haven't won the war. Daniel stared at the screen. He knew Victor would not give up. The biggest fight was still ahead, and this time Daniel was not fighting alone. The morning after the press conference, the entire world seemed to be talking about Daniel Carter. News channels replayed his speech repeatedly. Business experts analyzed every word he had spoken. Millions of people who had once judged him began seeing him differently. They no longer saw him as just a billionaire businessman. They saw him as a man who had stepped away from his own empire to discover something more valuable than money. But while the world admired Daniel's honesty, the people who had betrayed him were preparing their final move. Inside a private office far away from the city center, Victor Hayes sat in darkness, watching the news coverage on a large screen. Every report about Daniel's return made his anger grow stronger. Everything he had planned was falling apart. The company, the investors, and the public trust he had worked so hard to control were slipping away. He thinks he has won, Victor said quietly. His assistant looked worried. Mr. Hayes, the evidence against us is becoming public. We should consider leaving before... Victor interrupted. No. He stood up slowly. I spent years building this opportunity. I won't lose everything because Daniel decided to play the hero. The assistant remained silent. Victor looked at the screen showing Daniel standing beside Isabella. Then he noticed something. The woman beside Daniel. Who is she? The assistant checked the information. Her name is Isabella Monroe. She owns Monroe Fashion Group. Victor smiled. Everyone has a weakness. The assistant understood immediately. You want to use her? Victor nodded. If Daniel cares about her, she's the easiest way to hurt him. Meanwhile, Daniel and Isabella were unaware of Victor's plan. They were preparing for the future. Daniel had returned to his company, but he had changed the way he managed everything. He no longer wanted an organization built only on profits. He wanted a company built on trust, respect, and responsibility. Many employees were surprised by the changes. Daniel increased support for workers, created programs for struggling families, and invested in communities that had been ignored for years. When reporters asked why he was making such decisions, Daniel gave a simple answer. Because a company is not just buildings and numbers. A company is made of people. Isabella watched him during one of these interviews and smiled. She remembered the first time she saw him. A man sitting alone in the rain. A man nobody noticed. A man who had everything but chose to experience life without his wealth. "You really changed," Isabella told him one evening. Daniel looked at her. "Did I?" "Yes, the old Daniel built a powerful company. The new Daniel is building something meaningful." Daniel smiled. "Maybe I needed to lose everything to understand what I was supposed to create." Their relationship had grown stronger through everything they had experienced. They had faced secrets, danger, and uncertainty together. Isabella no longer saw Daniel as the billionaire from the news. She saw the man who helped a stranger. The man who listened. The man who understood that kindness was more valuable than success. But peace did not last forever. One night, Isabella received a call from her company's security team. "Miss Monroe, there has been a problem." Her expression changed. "What happened?" "Someone leaked private information about your company." Her heart sank. Within hours, rumors began spreading online. False accusations appeared. People questioned Isabella's business decisions. The attack was carefully planned. Daniel immediately knew who was responsible. "Victor." Isabella looked at him. "What are we going to do?" Daniel remained calm. "We don't fight lies with anger. We fight them with truth." The next day, Daniel and Isabella faced the media together. Victor expected them to panic. Instead, they stood united. They presented evidence showing that the information had been manipulated. They exposed the people behind the attack. They showed the world that the rumors were created to damage Isabella's reputation. Slowly, the truth came out. Victor Hayes had lost, not because Daniel destroyed him, but because the truth was stronger than his lies. After the investigation ended, Victor was removed from the company and faced legal consequences for his actions. The empire he tried to steal was no longer his. Months later, life became peaceful again. Daniel and Isabella visited the same street where they first met. The place looked different now. A community center had been built nearby to help people who had nowhere to go. Daniel stood quietly, remembering the night everything changed. "You know," Isabella said, "if you had never lost your fortune, we probably would have never met." Daniel smiled. "Maybe losing everything was the greatest gift I ever received." She looked at him. "Do you still think about being that man sitting in the rain?" "Every day." "Why?" "Because that man taught me something." "What?" Daniel looked around at the people walking by. "He taught me that everyone deserves to be seen." For years, Daniel Carter had believed wealth meant having everything. Now he understood that true wealth was different. It was having someone who believed in you. It was helping someone who could give you nothing in return. It was knowing that kindness could change a person's entire life. Isabella had taken a homeless stranger home without knowing his secret. She had not known he was a billionaire. She had not known he was powerful. She had not known he was the man the world was searching for. She only knew one thing: a person needed help, and she chose to help. That simple act of compassion changed two lives forever. Daniel regained his company. He defeated his enemies. He rebuilt his empire. But the greatest thing he gained was something no amount of money could buy. A person who saw him when the world looked away. A person who cared when he had nothing. A person who reminded him that the greatest fortune in life was not measured by what you own. It was measured by what you give.